ahead.
I accidentally killed somebody.
You think you killed somebody?
No, I know I did. My sister? I feel so messed up.
The day that Ella was born, Paris fell in love. Years later, he destroyed my life. I'm horrified about what he did to Ella, but I never stopped loving Paris. Paris knows somewhere inside of him, he is dark. And it's so obvious that he needs help. He said, you used to say that you would never be able to kill anybody unless they hurt one of your kids. I bet you didn't think it was gonna turn out like this.
The family I had.
Everybody, please put your hands together for Charity Lee, Caryle Rubin, and Katie Green. Let's hear it. Thank you so much for being here. Let's talk about this documentary. Charity, take me back to when someone decided they wanted to tell your story. What were your first thoughts? This is a deeply personal documentary. One of the most personal I feel like I've ever really watched. So what was that like for you deciding to do it?
Well, I had already been telling my own story through my advocacy work, and Katie and Carlye called me one day and they were like, we want to make this film. It's about juvenile justice. Can we use you as one of our subjects? And I said, sure. It was a completely different film at the time. But my reason for doing it was to reach as many people as possible. So when they called me and they wanted to do the film, I was like, sure.
What did it feel like, and we'll get to when it started changing for you as filmmakers, but what did it feel like for you when the film started to change? Did you notice that the story was changing that they were telling as you were working with them more?
No, I didn't notice the story was changing. Again, they just called me up one day and they're like, Charity, do you mind if we just make a film about you and your family instead? And I was like, okay, sure. Pretty much, I mean, this is what I say all the time, but pretty much anything they've asked me, I've just said yes to, because the goal for me all along has been to have as many people as possible hear the story, to have it affect as many people as possible, to get them thinking, and ultimately, hopefully, to leave them with some hope that trauma can be dealt with, and even though it may sound cheesy, that love really does conquer all.
Love in the face of trauma, in the face of fear as well at the same time, right?
Well, love, I mean, in the face of any adversity, whether it be personal, psychological, political, you know, we can...
Political's tough these days, I gotta tell you. No.
Yeah, well, you know, love. And to me, that's just been the answer. So I've always wanted people to have access. I mean, it's not easy for me. It's been 10 years. It's still very hard at times. But the goal is to spread the love that my children gave to me.
Katie, Carlye, talk to me about when the film changed for the two of you as you started to tell a story. Obviously, you wanted to tell a story about juvenile justice, which there is a trace of that in here, but that is not what this film is. So when did you find out what the film was?
I think for us, it was a lot of burying our heads in the sand for a while. We kind of were telling this story alongside another story that was also looking at another family that was dealing with extreme sentencing of youth. And the more we got to know Charity and her family and learn more about her story, we really realized how difficult it was to kind of pigeonhole this kind of really layered story within this wider film. So it was a lot of internal conversations and struggles, but we had been talking about it for several years before we made the decision.
And what did you come up with when you made the decision? I mean, like I said, going after a sort of film about juvenile justice, a very, very specific topic that you're going to sort of uncover the layers of. What did it turn out the specific topic was for you that you wanted to sort of reveal the layers of?
Well, for us, this still is a film to a certain extent about juvenile justice. I mean, Paris was 13 when he committed his crime and was sentenced to 40 years. And for us, even though maybe we don't see it as an advocacy type film, I think it does pose questions about whether or not that's right, where the responsibility lies, where accountability lies, what justice looks like. So for us, it still was, but it was actually a much more challenging story to be putting forward while talking about the issue of juvenile justice. So,
challenging in what way?
just because we appreciate this was a more complicated story, maybe a less sympathetic story than some of the other ones we were looking at that time, and so we were challenged by it. It made us ask questions about, well, what do we think is, what do we think is appropriate? Where do we feel justice lies here? So I think it was something that posed a lot of questions. So for us, we weren't trying to answer, offer a big solution to the issue of juvenile incarceration.
No, but you're absolutely right that issue still is, it's not necessarily at the heart of the film, but it is in the film in regards to certain things that people say within the context of the movie, and then also this idea of how punitive this country is in a lot of ways. Even those that are supposed to be therapists or psychologists, it sounds like that they operate from a standpoint of no one can change, and you should be punished to the greatest extent that we could possibly punish you, which is damaging for a child. Charity, what was it like for you? I mean, because you do this advocacy work yourself. What was it like for you when the story changed?
Well, for me, the story has never changed because this is my life. This is not, it's my story, but it's my life. I'm living it every day. So, the process for me was a simple process because they called, they were like, can we shadow you? I said, sure. And I just lived my life. Yeah. And, it was a hard process emotionally to go through, but it's not like the girls came and made what I was going through already harder. It's cathartic, it's helpful.
Is it cathartic when you finish a project like this and being a subject in a film like this? I've never really heard anyone say that it is actually cathartic for them at the end of the day when you watch the film.
It is cathartic because, I think the film does a good job of showing that there is no truth with a capital T. And even myself, 10, almost 11 years later, I'm still trying to figure things out. And so every telling or retelling of the story that I do or somebody else does or you do, it brings a new perspective and element to it. And that's what I'm hoping that people will experience themselves. Don't just look at something for the headline, oh my God, a 13-year-old murdered his sister. Get more information because, the more that I've learned about my son, it assisted the forgiveness process, right? And so in a way, it is cathartic. Now, it's always going to be there. It's not, they'll make another movie one day. We were just talking about this. They'll go on, they'll make other movies, they'll do their thing, but I'll be living this forever. So there is a level of catharsis, but it's never going to go completely.
What you just said about sort of getting beyond the headline reveals something that I thought was a wonderful structural tool of the film, which is you essentially start with the headline and you slowly peel back the layers, not to use that corny phrase again, of Charity's family history. Or, you even kind of just start with the nuclear family of Charity and the children and then expand to her mother and you explore the history of this entire family. Can you talk about developing that narrative tool?
Yeah, I think it was important to us to really emphasize the nuances within this family and within the story. These were complicated relationships as a result of this trauma. So we were very conscious of not wanting to focus so much on the crime, which is probably why we started with it in the first place, and then got it out of the way so we could really get to the heart of the family.
Right. So you start with, when did that start for you guys, though, in terms of editing it that way? When did you realize that was going to be how you tell the story?
Well, we knew we had a series of kind of, reveals throughout the film. We knew there was a lot of information. There was a lot to take in. So, I think for us to lay the groundwork at the beginning, we're like, this is really what, this is the beginning of where we come in terms of telling this story. So we were editing as we go. So I think we always kind of knew we were going to be trying to speak to other people, obviously speaking to Charity's mother and stepsister and friends and some other people that were around. So it was really about just trying not to kind of blow the audience right in the face straight away, but kind of slowly, let people get to know and understand the characters so they could understand these other reveals within a sort of wider context.
Oh, sorry. What was it like when you watched the film, seeing your mother's perspective in her interviews? I'm sure you'd probably already known that perspective through talking to her, but it's different when you watch, she's not saying it to you, she's saying it to filmmakers on a screen, you know?
It was interesting because at the time that Katie and Carlye were filming my mother, we were not on speaking terms. I didn't speak to her for a good 5 or 6 years. So they interviewed her. I knew they were going to interview her. They were like, is there anything you don't want? I was like, no, just, free reign. Do whatever you want to do. Don't even worry about my reaction.
The greatest documentary subject in the world right here.
So I saw the film, and my mother and I did not watch it together. But I saw the film, and it was tough. But it wasn't surprising because of some of the things that I had already gone through with my mother. But it was made tougher by the fact that, in the meantime, I had reconciled with my mother. And so, we were living in the same town, and there was a tense couple of days.
Reopening old wounds, kind of.
Yeah, we have very different perspectives on how to live, how to parent, what happened. So it was tough, but, not the toughest thing I've ever had to deal with. So you get through it.
I have to ask, it's been 7-8 years, right, since the crime was committed? 10. Oh, excuse me.
Almost 11.
I apologize. Excuse me. I believe you said that like 5 minutes ago.
That's fine.
How is Paris doing? How is your son doing right now?
Paris is fine. Yeah, he's fine. He's very, stable mood, He, my son, in my opinion, is, it's no secret, I believe he is a sociopath, and not much seems to get to him. Right. So if you're, if you have shallow feelings, then not much is going to get to you, good or bad. But he goes to work in prison, he writes his letters, he reads his books, he doesn't seem to have any issues that I'm aware of, and he just goes on about his life. I think that my son's biggest worry is he does not want to be locked up.
Yeah, of course.
Nobody wants to be locked up, but I think sometimes he doesn't necessarily fully comprehend the magnitude of what he did.
Right. Therefore, why he is locked up, right?
Yes.
What was it like interviewing Paris? Through the glass partition, right? Yeah. What was it like doing those interviews with him?
There's that barrier there, so you're already kind of at a disadvantage. But in terms of our interactions with him, he was incredibly open, and he's very intelligent and charismatic and polite and fairly forthcoming. So I think we had a good experience with speaking with him, but there was that difficulty of having that physical barrier, and also it doesn't look very pretty on camera, like in an aesthetic point of view from a filmmaker. When you're shooting at glass, it's not ideal. But yeah.
I think it adds actually an aesthetic quality, to the story as well. You may not be able to get that beautiful depth of field, but yeah.
Yeah, but I think it sets him at a disadvantage in terms of the viewer's perception of him from the get-go. So I think that was something that we had to work against.
What was your biggest challenge as filmmakers in putting this story together?
Well, obviously, it's just a very complicated story, and it's traumatic, and it's difficult for people to take on straight away. And we knew we didn't want to do anything that was going to be a sort of salacious headline type film. We spent the best part of 4 years making this film, and we really, for us, this was a family story then, and this was a film about forgiveness and redemption, and this family that were trying to overcome tragedy. And I think, that it was a challenge. It was a challenge to really try and think about how we how we told the story. And we had, countless conversations with our editor, Tina Grapin-Thin, who was editing with us like pretty much from the beginning of filming as well. And yeah, I mean, it's still a challenge, even in the way that we, now when it's getting ready to go out into the world.
There is a different kind of pace to the film. You do slow it down, and you're not going for that salaciousness. And you say that it's challenging. I'm wondering if it is challenging because so much of what we're told as storytellers is to be faster, to think, to almost think salaciously, because we live in a market that sort of dominates that way. Is it hard to train your brain to not do that, even when you're this sincere and care this much about a story?
Yeah, I mean, I think people want answers as well. Like, I mean, people feel like we were going to offer some kind of solution, and I think that's not what we would ever try to do.
I don't think there is a solution, and I also don't think we're not those types of filmmakers. I don't think anyway. So it wasn't a challenge. That wasn't a challenge for us in particular. We had plenty of challenges, but that wasn't one of them.
Charity, do you feel like there is a solution if people are looking for a solution?
To which particular problem?
Well, if people are going into this film and looking for a solution, do you think that there is one, or that there's something that they can come out of it with?
Yes, hope. I mean, to me, in my life, in my way of thinking, hope is the solution to almost everything, right? That's why people keep going through all these hard times, because I'm not the only one. Everybody in this room has had something, at least one thing, that has happened to them that they've held on to, some trauma. I don't know anybody that has not experienced trauma. And I think that the point for me, what is hope, to show people there's hope. And like I said, it may sound cliche, but love really does open doors that you did not think possible, right? It doesn't, I want people to realize through seeing the film that there are no answers, right? The stories, any story, it's a matter of perspective, right? So I might have one solution, you may have a solution, you may have a solution. Trying to figure out what that is that will help everybody is almost impossible in a case like this, right? I mean, we like to talk about justice, and there is no justice for something like this. I think that telling the story, sharing the story, making what happened to both of my children and myself and my family meaningful is the only justice left. Ella will never come back to life. Paris will never not be who he is. I will never forget what happened. And it's just, so the only justice is to turn it into, or take it away from the darkness and make it hopeful. Because really that's what I want to do for people. I mean, I'm a big advocate and I want to raise awareness to issues of incarceration. But my thing is letting people know you can do this. You can get through this, right? And I can help you, I can teach you, I can tell you what I did, but really this is your path, but it can be walked.
I don't think any of that sounded cliche. That was really great, thank you. Let's get some questions from the audience.
Hi, I was wondering what specific changes you'd like to see in the justice system regarding juvenile incarceration.
Oh my goodness, let's see.
Where to start?
Where would I start? First of all, I don't believe that children should ever be charged as adults. Fortunately, my child was 6 months short. Had he been 14, Texas would have certified him as an adult, and he would have been sent to an adult prison at the age of 14. And there's some bad people in Texas prisons. So
Excuse me, could he have, at 14, could he have been given a death sentence?
No.
Okay.
No, but had he committed his crime in 2005, children under the age of 18 were eligible for death sentences had he been certified as an adult. It was only in 2005 that the Supreme Court ruled you can no longer kill children in America.
2005.
2005.
That.
Yes. 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 And it was only recently that we decided that you can't give a child a life without parole sentence, and those children are still sitting in jail because people are actually arguing about it.
That was 2012.
Mandatory life.
Yeah, that was 2012. And so now what they're doing is giving them like 60-year sentences. Well, that's still life for a kid, you know?
And where are we with children in solitary confinement? That is still
They're still in solitary.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's because they can't be in general population. So, they do it to keep them safe, but actually, they're mentally harming them.
I mean, not to borrow from the title of their other film, but there really is no place for children in prison. They should not be there. Children, this is one of the reasons I became an advocate, because my daughter was murdered in February, and then around March or April, I can't remember exactly, the state of Texas was put under federal indictment for the physical and sexual abuse of children in their care. And that really, really made me angry. My son had never been physically abused. He had never been sexually abused. And it sure wasn't going to start now. In my mind, his punishment was his loss of freedom, and that's it. So that's what got me advocating on behalf of the juveniles. Juveniles should be given rehabilitation, right? Allegedly, a lot of states have rehabilitation, but if you start looking at their numbers, the research following along, whatever rehabilitation they receive doesn't seem to take and hold. And one of the things that I found in my own experience was, depending on the state, I tried every way I knew to get family counseling for my son and I, right? While he was in the juvenile system, because their mandate, what we pay for, is for them to rehabilitate our children, right? To take care of them, not to rape them, not to beat them, not to make them worse. And they would always tell me, well, Paris is in counseling, but you're not our client. And I'm like, I am his mother. And so then I tried going in Texas, you can request victim offender mediation. And they wouldn't even let me do that with my own son. I was like, then put us in a victim perpetrator mediation and let us try to work through some issues that way. They were like, no, we don't really think that's a good idea. And so I think one of the problems that the juvenile system makes, kids do not exist in a vacuum. If an adult gets out of prison, they don't either. But a kid, normally, a juvenile offender, will get out and they will go home. And they will go back to their family, and they will go back to that environment. And if that environment or that family has not been given any assistance, and then we get upset with these children for doing the same things once they leave, whose fault is it? So no kids in prison, but if you're going to put them there, they need real help. Real help.
Next question.
Hello, I'm going to ask you a challenging question, but nothing is not challenging about this subject. Can you describe the guilt you may have felt and how you dealt with it as you saw your own child at 13 commit such a crime, and you also come from a past that's pretty heavy, and how did you hang on and kept moving forward? What kept you moving?
So, in terms of guilt, I went through a period where I had to do a lot of self-introspection. What is my responsibility? What is not my responsibility? I come from a family where there are definitely mental health and addiction issues, and there's been violence in the past. I don't want to give too much away because y'all haven't seen it. And I had my own issues growing up with addiction and mental health. And kind of what I came to after a very long period of analyzing myself was I own the mistakes that I made as a mother. Nobody is a perfect parent. We all mess up. But when I look back at how I parented my children and how I continue to parent my children, we all share some responsibility, but the ultimate responsibility is Paris's. He could have made other choices. He is not your typical youth offender. He's highly intelligent. he did not have a lot of the issues that a lot of the other children that I've worked with have. And so now, 10 years later, I have learned to live with the mistakes that I did make, but I do not feel the mistakes that I made justify or explain his actions. Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
Hi. Thanks so much for sharing your story. It's so brave of you to tell. Like, I thank you for your vulnerability. I was just kind of wondering, just hearing your story, it just brings to mind the importance of mental health. And I was wondering if any of you had advice to just us as citizens to bring awareness to mental health and maybe create more of an emphasis on it in this country.
I mean, the only thing I would say is we need to be talking about these things. I mean, the problem with mental health diagnoses in America, all over the world, but specifically in our community, is the fact that it's taboo and it's stigmatized. So we need to lift that veil and be talking about it, because we all have mental health. We all need to be taking care of our mental health, so we need to be talking about these issues.
It's never preventative either. We don't really have the facilities in this country for preventative mental health issues, or preventing mental health issues from getting even more severe. It's usually after something severe has happened that we end up sort of putting someone in usually in prison is where we put them and say, get mental health help here. Yeah. Charity, did you want, sorry, still your answer.
No, I agree with Carlye. I mean, people just need to talk about it. I could sit down and do an assessment on every single person on the streets of New York, and every single one of them would have a diagnosis, you know? Everybody has, like she said, everybody has mental health. It just occurs on a spectrum. Some are more severe than others. And so I think we need to get away from this idea of, oh, they're crazy. We're all crazy, right? We need to stop being so judgmental and start being more supportive, right? We're spending way too much time judging one another and not enough time helping one another. And the best therapy for any mental illness is support. Lots and lots of support and, good professional help. So I think we just need to get away from the stigma of it.
Thank you so much for being here. Congratulations on the film. Thank you for sharing your story. The Family I Had, the all-new ID film, premieres Thursday, December 21st at 9 p.m. Give them a round of applause, everybody. Thank you so much. Thanks.